Hi again, everyone. Patrick Fingston from the Illinoize political newsletter, and welcome you to the Illinoize podcast. We're glad you're here. It is Monday, April 3rd, as we're recording this, which is the day before the statewide municipal elections, where you'll have a lot of mayor races, city council races, and school board races on the ballot all across the state. We're going to talk about a lot of those races in our quick show today. And then, of course, we'll follow up and talk some more about results in our live stream on Wednesday. The big one is obviously the city of Chicago mayoral race. That's what sucked all the air out of the room. But there are a lot of mayoral races in some of the state's largest communities. So we'll hit on those a little bit too. And it's a really interesting electoral season, and to talk about that, and because it's opening day, he's just being a pain by putting on his White Sox jersey. I'm sure I've got a Cubs hat around here somewhere, but my friend Collin Corbett from Core Strategies out in the suburbs, he's been monitoring a lot of these mayoral and city council elections, school board elections around the state, specifically Chicago. Collin doesn't have a dog in the fight. They've just kind of been working on it from the outside. So, Collin, let's start here. Paul Vallas, to me, feels like the clear favorite going into Election Day. Am I wrong?
You're not wrong in that in a normal race, this would be a blowout. Vallas would be just killing it. The problem is I've been putting this information out for about the last week because I keep hearing people talk about why isn't he locked this down? Why isn't he breaking 50% of the polls? And there's a very simple reason for that, and it's math. The city of Chicago, the demographics, the ideological splits, the partisan splits are such that Vallas is dominating, but he has to win so many more voters in order to pull this off because Johnson's base is just so massive. It being home opener day for the Sox, I'll use the baseball analogy of Vallas needs to score 5 runs to win, whereas Johnson only needs to score 3. So you're right, Vallas is dominating, but in a math scenario, Johnson still actually has a path to victory despite running a pretty poor race.
You've used the analogy or not analogy, but the description of their campaigns that Vallas is running a persuasion campaign and Johnson is running a turnout campaign. Why are they doing that, and what's working?
Yeah, I mean, Vallas has to. So in Vallas's case, we ran the numbers, and he has to not only completely own the right of center base and dominate the middle, he also has to win 22% roughly of Johnson's base in order to pull this off. So Vallas's only path was to run what's called a persuasion campaign, bring people on your side. That's why you see him pushing coalitions. That's why you see him pushing out, trying to win older Black voters, getting conservative Hispanics, getting working class whites from various pockets of the city. He has to. It's the only path to victory for him, but he's done a very, very good job at it. Johnson, to me, I think it's a misreading of the tea leaves. The people running his race are from the far, far left of the political spectrum. And these are people who saw in November Democrats use a abortion message and then win. And so they connected the dots and said, well, if A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C. We used abortion. It worked. We won. So let's go. But they didn't actually look at the data, because if you look at November, Democrats didn't win because abortion worked for them. Female turnout was down. Minority turnout was down. Progressive turnout, young turnout, all down. And so to me, it's a misreading of the tea leaves where they think all we got to do is get our base out and we're good. But ultimately right now, looking at February, looking at November in Chicago, the base has not been turning out on the progressive side in the city. And so to me, it was a failed strategy from the beginning. Now, because that base is so massive, the wrong strategy may end up actually working for Johnson, but it wouldn't be a sign that the campaign strategy worked, because if you look at the demographics, he ought to win this race by well into the double digits, and he's not.
The Johnson campaign has been interesting to me in the sense that it has not hidden from the fact that he is bought and paid for by CTU, which is obviously a divisive figure within city politics, and the fact that he has tried so unconvincingly to back away from these defund the police lines that he has used over the years. And I know you didn't agree with what the piece I wrote last week, where I said Vallis is essentially going to win because of the public safety message. So it seems like Johnson's just not reading the room when it comes to public safety. Is it a mistake for Johnson, or is it just that Vallis is doing it right?
Yeah. So what I disagree with isn't you're right. The point I disagree with is simply that it's by design. It's not that Johnson doesn't know these things that you're talking about. That's where the strategy comes in. If you're running a persuasion strategy, which is what Johnson ought to be doing, then he does the things you're talking about, because crime is far and away the strongest issue. And if he did move a little bit to the center on crime and a couple other issues, embrace that, he would have the African-American vote locked down right now, the older and the more progressive, and this race would be over. But he hasn't done that, and so it's by design. They're running that turnout campaign. They want their base to show up, and if he in any way goes against the base's issues, you lose that excitement of the base. You don't bring in Bernie Sanders. You don't get all these national, very progressive endorsements if you're going for the center vote. So what you're describing is that he is intentionally doing those things, and that's the only part I disagree with. He ought to be doing what you're saying, but this is part of their strategy. We're going to find out on Tuesday if it works. I'm of the mind that it may not work. But again, that's the point. If he wins by any less than 10 points, his strategy didn't work. That's the watermark for him. He's supposed to win by 10 to 15 points. So if he wins by 8, he wins, but that's an indictment on his strategy. I think he barely loses. But ultimately, people got to realize what the expectations game is here.
What's your gut telling you going in?
I think Vallis has it. The one thing we have to keep an eye on is that turnout. When we look at early voting turnout in this race, it signifies good signs for Vallis. We put out something over the weekend that talked about some of those numbers, about where we're seeing strong turnout among seniors and even middle-aged voters. We're seeing strong turnout from white voters. They make up right now 48% of the early vote. We're seeing black turnout just be okay. They're only making up about 24% of the early vote. Republican turnout is up a little bit. Democrat turnout is down a little bit. So you expect that Vallis is going to win the early votes. You expect that Vallis is going to win Election Day. The question is, how much does Johnson win the vote by mail ballots by? And so the one thing I'll say is, when you're watching this race on Election Day, don't get too excited when the first couple rounds of votes come in, because Johnson is going to gain all night. He's going to gain for days. And so the key is, if Vallis is up by 10 early on, you could feel comfortable with that. If Vallis is only up by 5, Johnson may make up those points in the hours and days after 7 o'clock on Tuesday night.
Well, so actually, it'll be the early votes. It'll be the early votes that come out first, because they'll dump those all in and push those cards in win those votes. Yeah, so we'll see those, the early votes come in, and then the mail votes will be in that as well, and then we'll see the day of trickle in, and then of course, if it's close, the late arriving mail ballots could be in the thousands and could change everything. So let's move out to the suburbs. In Naperville, you have an open race between a city councilman, Benny White, and a local businessman, Scott Worley. It's a really, to me, it's an indicative story of where DuPage County has gone. Naperville was rock solid Republican for so many years. The current mayor is a Republican, but has kind of moved himself away from the traditional Republican Party. Is this a race that just shows why Republicans are having such a hard time in DuPage County?
It is. It's very reminiscent of the Greg Hart campaign for county board president. I know a lot of the same people are involved, so that's not overly surprising. Where you sort of have this transition. We've seen this doing politics in other states. I watched this happen in Texas, for instance, where when we haven't had to fight for so long, when it was so easy for so long, you don't know tactically how to win. And we're seeing that a bit in DuPage, where it was so easy for so long that suddenly with the Democrats making inroads, we were caught flat-footed. Most of our candidates hadn't had to run tough races. Even our incumbents just never had to work very hard to win. Our staff, our political people behind the scenes hadn't really had to run those tough races. And so I think we're playing catch up a little bit. And we're seeing some winnable races go by the wayside. This is a situation where you have to understand that White is the front runner. So Worley not winning, that's the expected result. But that doesn't mean that Worley can't win this race. He's running a strong campaign. I know he's working hard, but this is absolutely a winnable race. This is not a foregone conclusion.
He's had obviously more money in the race because of the business community over there. There are still some Republican donors in that part of the world. I think these are mail races for the most part. Direct mail where you're trying to convince voters through mail, less than maybe your traditional gubernatorial race where there's so much spent on TV and so much spent on digital. What's the strategy in a place like Naperville where you're essentially your own ecosystem out there, but you're still without your own media market? You don't have your own radio station. The Tribune's your newspaper. Your Chicago TV hasn't been out there at all. How do you run that sort of race, either side?
Yeah, I mean, it's you have to have an air game and a ground game. And I think that's been a little bit of our challenge. Well, a lot of bit of our challenge on the Republican side is limited ground game. Even when we do well in the air game with whether it's TV or in your case, you're right. This is a mail race over a TV race. You can do cable, but it's mostly going to be done in mailboxes and over a lot of targeted digital ads, which I know a lot of that's happening right now. But you got to pair that with a ground game. And I think that's when we've been looking at this race. From an air game perspective, when it comes to mail, when it comes to messaging and marketing, Worley's actually done a great job, and he's probably beating White in that category. It's the ground game where White is dominating Worley. And so when we project this race out, these local races are all about turnout. When it's a 10 to 15% voter turnout, maybe you get to 20%. These races are dominated by who can get their voters to the polls. And the Democrats have a stronger ground game. White has a stronger ground game. And so he's going to get his people to the polls. That's why we see this race leans White.
For those that don't do this, what do you mean by ground game?
Yeah, it's bodies, it's activity, it's grassroots activity. We put out a tweet on the race, and I had 7 different replies from Benny White supporters pushing Benny White. So social media, it's not just door to door, but it is door to door. It's texting, it's phone calls, it's having bodies. The Republican Party tends to struggle with this. Our actions are paid. We'll put out a paid text over having human beings actually text voters. We'll do lit drops because we can't afford to get enough people out there to go knock on doors and talk to voters. An actual grassroots campaign and grassroots activity, we struggle with this right of center, and we have for a while. This is White's significant advantage in the race. And so that's the problem for somebody like Worley. It was the problem for Greg Hart and for others in DuPage County, where you could run a great marketing campaign, but that's only half the equation. We struggle with the other half.
And down in Joliet, it's sort of the opposite. It's kind of a long-time blue-collar union town. And obviously these races are quote unquote nonpartisan, but we know who the Republican is. We know who the Democrat is. You have an incumbent mayor there, Bob Odenkirk, who one would have thought would be fine in a race like this. And polling shows both from Terry Darcy's campaign and from your shop that there could very well be a blowout in Joliet tomorrow. What happened there?
Yeah, and actually, my team was on the ground just interviewing voters last week and over the weekend. And yeah, this thing, it's going to be a blowout. It's not does Darcy win? It's by how much. It's really it's Odenkirk's style. So we've worked, and you have too, with a lot of people like Odenkirk, where the results sometimes are there. I don't live in Joliet, so I can't speak to all of it. So I'm not saying he's done an amazing job or a horrible job. It's really not about that. It's about his style, the way he's done it. He's a very brash person. We see this with nationally, like Chris Christie and people like that, where people love it for a little while and then it wears on them. I mean, people loved Lightfoot's style until it wore on them and then they were done with her. And with Odenkirk, he's been in office 8 years. And this really hit the fan in 2020 during the protests or riots, whatever you want to describe it as, where he got into some major problems. Again, sort of believing his own narrative that, man, people love this tough guy exterior that I show. And that kind of thing has a shelf life. And unfortunately for Odenkirk, the shelf life, it's expired for him.
When you look at these suburban communities, and obviously Naperville and Joliet aren't the only ones that have mayoral races this weekend. We don't have all day to talk about all of them, but they're two very different examples of where suburban communities are. I mean, Naperville is the growing, affluent, uh, you know, ritzy sort of suburb out to the west, and Joliet's that blue collar, hard hitting, you know, sort of struggling with crime and infrastructure issues. That that's kind of almost like your Rust Belt sort of town. When you see the two sort of communities in there and the way that they're approaching these races differently, you see uh, the way that the kind of business minded Republican is the underdog and not catching on. Or if he does win in Naperville, it'll be a surprise. Now you've got the business minded Republican in Joliet that's likely to clean house. What's the difference in these different communities? Is it demographics? Is it race? Is it money? Why are these suburbs all so different politically?
Yeah, I think the big thing that I like to teach my team. I mean, we've got 5 people on our political team. We've got a lot more on our ops team. And I always say everybody has a strategy that's good. We want to hear from everyone on the team because each of these regions are different. And I wouldn't say that it's easier or harder to win in one place or another. I think back 2 years ago, we elected a business-minded, conservative, semi-conservative woman as mayor of the city of Waukegan over the incumbent Black mayor. I mean, it's possible in these very blue areas to win, but you're running it happens a lot is people run one race, they win, and so they just do that strategy over and over. And each of these locations are different. Naperville is different than Joliet. Joliet's different than Rockford. Rockford's different than Waukegan. Waukegan's different than Springfield. And so you've got to be able to develop a strategy around that specific community. And right now, the South Suburbs is a ripe community for Republicans and conservatives. You look back to the election results from November, and you'll see that Republicans actually did pretty well in Will County. They did pretty well in the South Suburbs. A lot better than they did in Lake or DuPage or some of these other counties. It's because it's working class voters who are frustrated with crime. They're frustrated with how left moving the Democratic Party has been. We always talk about how the Republican Party has moved past our voters, and it's kind of true. So is the Democratic Party. They're moving further and further left, and they're leaving behind working class voters in the South Suburbs. And so I think you just have to understand the community in which you're running and build a strategy around that. And that's where I think we've been struggling.
Let's move downstate to Springfield, where the incumbent Jim Langfelder is facing the city treasurer Misty Buscher. Buscher has run a pretty good race from all indication. I don't think her paid media has been particularly good from what I've seen, but it doesn't have to be sometimes, especially if you have good money coming in. But she's kind of got a broad coalition. Republicans, some unions. You've got kind of your Democratic establishment behind Langfelder. What are you seeing on the ground down there?
Yeah, we're fascinated in the dichotomy between Naperville and Springfield and how different strategies are producing different results. We obviously have to see on Tuesday night what happens, but Buscher has done a very, very good job, and the people behind her have done a very good job on the ground game side of this. And they've done a great job on building coalitions and extending their support. So what they did is they locked down their base and then moved to the middle and built a campaign around the middle. And so as a result, they've got a really strong ground game to go with the fact that they've got all sorts of endorsements. And you look at the early voting numbers right now, and there's a few numbers that indicate Langfelder has a good chance in this race. Senior turnout is high, and he'll probably do well with seniors. But there's a few other, you look at Democratic turnout being just okay, whereas Republican turnout is great down there in Springfield right now. Obviously, Buscher is going to do very well with Republicans. A lot of Republicans are backing her, as are Democrats and independents. I just think everything's lining up for Buscher to pull this off. And people got to realize is that Langfelder is Teflon. I mean, the guy has been counted out time and time again, and he always pulls it out. He will overperform every single number that you come into that race with. So if Misty pulls this race off, it's going to be an impressive win.
It was interesting. The old line, yard signs don't vote. But I was really surprised when I was in Springfield last week at the sign advantage for Buscher, even in areas kind of around the Capitol that you wouldn't consider your rock rib Republican areas. It's kind of you've got a few more, liberal and African American neighborhoods around the capital area. Is that an excitement issue? Is that people in Springfield just being frustrated with the I don't know if you want to call it deadening, but it's just, Springfield's just not booming at the moment. What are their issues?
Yeah, so you asked two questions. I'm going to give you two answers. The first answer on yard signs, as you know, yard signs don't vote. Here's the hidden secret on yard signs, especially in a city like Springfield. Sure, voters are putting signs up, but that's not what you're seeing. That's just indicative of having the firefighters and a number of other very active unions who are awesome at yard signs on your side. Those of us in politics know that some of these groups, you get them on your side, you're going to own the yard sign game. That's what you're seeing there. So it's a sign of the union support that Busher has been able to pull together. That's what you're seeing with those signs. In terms of what's motivating,
which is an interesting, comparison to Chicago, that the firefighter and police unions are with the more centrist candidate than they are the traditional, longtime Democratic or progressive candidates.
Yeah, I mean, you see those unions tend to lean center right. So I wouldn't be. I'm not surprised they're with Vallis. I'm not surprised they're with Busher. So I mean, it makes sense. And I think they've been more and more vocal over the years. So it's certainly one of the few advantages that right of center candidates might have in this state if they can tap into it. So it definitely is a benefit for Busher's campaign. I really think, you hit a point. We've run a lot of incumbent races in these municipalities, and you hit a point where voters just want change. They want something different. We just went through one of the hardest things to go through in COVID and some of these other challenges. And so right or wrong, voters just want something new. And sometimes that's good, sometimes that's bad. Sometimes you end up with Mark Trestman because you got rid of Lovie Smith. So it's not always good that you get new. But ultimately, I just think that's Langfelder's issue. There's a few minor challenges that he has that the Busher campaign is doing a great job at pushing. But this isn't an Odekirk situation where there's just an Oppo book and he's easy to beat. There's so much to attack. It just isn't really what's happening here. I think it's just Springfield voters want to see change. You're right, it has stagnated a bit. And so people want to see something new, and Busher is new. I mean, she's got experience. She's a city treasurer now, so it's not like you're getting somebody who doesn't know how to run a government. And so I think that's really what this is boiling down to in this race.
And interestingly, in Chicago, in Champaign, where you have a kind of center right, barely Republican mayoral candidate in a city that has moved so leftward, Deb Feinen is the clear favorite to win a third term.
Well, and that comes down to results. I mean, you and I know Deb has done a great job in the city there. And ultimately, when you're the incumbent, you have an advantage for a reason. If you do the job, Madigan taught his House members this all the time. Act as if you're a ward boss. Act as if you're a precinct person. Go out there and take care of the people, and they're going to vote you in. They're going to take care of you. And that's, that I'll point to something people don't realize in Joliet. That's part of why Darcy ran away with this thing. If you go anywhere in that town, you've seen Darcy's name for years. He has been investing in community projects, supporting the local Little League clubs with his logo up there for his car dealerships. I mean, when you invest in your community, that's how you win. A lot of these races, we get so stuck in the campaign, and the campaign means so little. Races are won and lost before a campaign starts. And that's what I think you see in a Deb Feinem. That's what you see in a Terry Darcy. I mean, these people put themselves in great position. In Deb's case, by being a good mayor and taking care of the people. In Darcy's case, by investing in the community for years. That's how you set yourself up for success. And you can see good examples of that in those two candidates.
And just in the interest of full disclosure, I worked on finance campaigns in 2015 and 2019, but don't have any role with her this time around. So
hey, we all know you have no problem pissing off your friends. So I think everybody believes you'll say it if it's true.
I don't know what you mean by that. So before we let you go, Collin, the big political battle over school boards. This is maybe brewing from COVID, but also the kind of culture wars out there over, transgenders and the theory of critical race theory that isn't actually curriculum. The Democrats have come in with a ton of money. Republicans and affiliated groups, because the state party doesn't have any money, have come in to support, right-leaning candidates. Why have partisan politics infected school board races kind of where they haven't ever before?
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of inevitable. We saw this with mayoral races. We saw this with even township races. It really started at townships because most of these township races are partisan. Then it bled into mayoral races, and then it bled into these boards. This really was unfortunately inevitable because everything is politics now. I mean, you can't watch a sports game. You can't do anything without it being political nowadays. So this unfortunately was inevitable. And both sides are doing it. I've heard this narrative that it's all the right and it's all the right's fault. I got text messages from Democrats that they sent out to left-leaning voters, or who they thought were left-leaning voters, the summer and fall of last year, trying to recruit people to run for local office, saying, we'll support you, we'll donate to you, we'll help you. This isn't just Republicans. Both sides have done it. So if you don't like it, you can't just blame one side or the other. Both sides have done this. We've politicized our school boards. And that part's unfortunate. But I think when you look at it, this is just like everything else in our politics, where there's a reasonable middle lane here. I was talking to some members of a teachers union who vote very left-leaning. Obviously, I'm more right-leaning. And we just, off the record, no cameras, no recordings. We both promised we wouldn't tell anybody who we were in this conversation. We talked about some of these books that are in question. And you can't even put these books, like I couldn't put it on your podcast. You'd get blacklisted if you had some of these images on your podcast. And so there's a reasonable lane here where we say, okay, both sides have a point. We should be exposing kids to opinions that aren't their own. That's a good thing. That's the point of education. So we're not going to ban books. We're not going to only give one viewpoint. And on this side, okay, yeah, you're right. Some of this isn't age appropriate. There's a easy middle lane here where, frankly, I'd imagine the vast majority of Americans, and I've seen this in polling, fit in that middle lane. And yet our political parties are taking it to either you're a book banner or you want to give pornography to 3-year-olds. And there's so few voters there. Everyone is here. And so my hope is we get through April, we get through tomorrow, and then maybe the next time around we can do this better, where we say, you know what, let's have a more reasonable and responsible conversation, because there is a good conversation to be had here, but it's just not happening right now.
As the centrist voice has been shouted down now for a while, I don't know that we'll see everyone come to their senses, but we can
dream.
All right, Collin Corbett from Core Strategies, based in the suburbs. Good luck to your White Sox. I have nothing against the White Sox. I'm a downstate Cubs fan, so my hatred is for the Cardinals. So I will continue to not care about your baseball team. So thank you, my friend. I appreciate it.
See you, buddy.
All right, thanks to our friend Collin Corbett from Core Strategies, based in the suburbs, for his thoughts on the Chicago mayor's race and mayor's races around the suburbs and downstate too. Appreciate his perspective. He's kind of one of the few voices in the state that's been watching all of the races. A lot of your media has been Chicago only focused or just in their own communities. So good to get a perspective on the wide lens, the wide angle lens around the state. We'll have plenty of coverage in our newsletter Wednesday morning on not only the Chicago mayor's race, but mayor's races from around the state and what it means moving forward. Should be fun. It's always an election day that is a little bit under the radar, but one that's very important. Obviously the municipal level of government and school board level of government is the one that's most directly impacting to your life. So pay attention, do your homework. Everybody has a website. Everybody has a Facebook page. Do your homework and go out and get to the poll on Tuesday. Thanks so much for joining us. You can read our stuff anytime at theillinoize.com, and we'll talk to you again soon.